My friends, our dependence on fossil fuels is warming our planet. We must switch to clean energy. We can protect our planet and help to reverse the economic downturn.
The problem's not a lack of technology. The problem is that for decades we've avoided doing what we must do to turn challenge into opportunity.
Not one single day goes by without our world facing environmental and climate challenges. Ice caps are melting and oceans rising as we quest for answers and durable solutions. But the good news is there already exist sustainable answers and solutions, one of the most convincing of which is wind power.
In this program, we will see how wind power can contribute to our common challenge to combat climate changes by reducing the world's CO2 emissions without compromising our energy's security of supply. Denmark has led the way with large-scale wind power. We will see how this achievement has been accomplished and how Denmark plans to proceed even further on a larger scale, exploiting the enormous power of nature to create CO2-free electricity to consumers wherever they are and whenever they need it. Wind is one of the most abundant natural energy sources in the world. And it's cheap. But it's tricky because it fluctuates. The main challenge with wind energy is to ensure a constant and reliable source of energy supply to consumers. And how do we do that when the energy source fluctuates as wind conditions change? This is the amazing story of how to integrate large amounts of wind energy into the power system.
The EU has set a target that by 2020, renewable energy must make up 20% of the total generation of electricity. And around the globe, countries are aiming to reach similar targets. A large part of renewable energy must come from wind power, so thousands of wind turbines have to be erected in order to reach such ambitious targets. This need for renewable energy can be converted into a huge number of kilowatts, as wind power is an effective resource when it comes to seriously reducing CO2 emissions. Let's just see how far some countries around the world have come in their efforts to make wind power a significant part of their electricity consumption.
Here we have wind power's share of the annual consumption of electricity today. We start with three large countries with less than 0.5%. India, Australia, and Brazil. China and the US are at approximately 1%. Two European countries follow with approximately 2% of their annual electricity consumption derived from wind power: Sweden and Great Britain. Three countries with some of the highest share of wind production today in the world are Germany, Spain, and Denmark. Germany stands at 7%, Spain at approximately 12%, and Denmark with the highest share of wind power in the world. Here, wind power constitutes a full 20% of the total electricity consumption. Moreover, Denmark has extensive plans to continue its expansion of wind power.
The Danish wind fairy tale began among small, innovative machine manufacturers and other craftsmen in the countryside, and also among young people in popular movements just after the shocking energy crisis of the 70s. Slowly, wind power developed into an industry, and wind power became a significant energy resource in Denmark. Not least because of a targeted strategy, an unrelenting active political effort, and a uniquely innovative culture.
Today, America produces less than 3% of our electricity through renewable sources like wind and solar. Now, in comparison, Denmark produces almost 20% of their electricity through wind power.
In 1980, all the electricity in Denmark was generated by 16 power stations. at that time, adjusting the electricity generation to suit the electricity consumption was, by and large, a question of throwing more or less fuel into the boilers at the power stations as and when it was needed. Today, the situation is different. The power stations still generate a substantial proportion of the energy. However, a fertile undergrowth of energy producers has emerged. Small local cogeneration plants, solar heating systems, and last but not least, approximately 5,500 wind turbines. The task of integrating all the electricity generated by the numerous producers is managed here at the national grid, the transmission system operator in Denmark.
To cut a long story short, the national grid in Denmark is responsible for balancing the power system in order to have electricity in both windy and calm weather. Then why is integrating wind power into the power grid such a huge challenge?
If the balance between generation and consumption is not maintained every second of every day, all year round, then serious problems arise. If the current is too small, electricity will disappear from the outlet. If the current is too large, the same thing will happen to the Danish power system that happens to the incandescent bulb here. The power system breaks down.
Connecting a few wind turbines to a country's power grid is not a problem. The large challenge is when thousands of wind turbines are connected to the power grid and wind power becomes a large part of consumption. For what do we do with the power when the wind is so strong that we generate more power than we can consume? And where will the power come from when there is no wind? Even with the high wind power production averaging 20% of Denmark's consumption, a high amount of power production is still needed from other forms of power generation. Denmark has some of the most efficient power plants in the world, using both fossil fuel and CO2 neutral biomass. Normally, power plants are not built to a flexible production resulting from fluctuating wind power. But Danish power plants have a high capacity to regulate production. Which main ingredients is Denmark using in order to make wind integration into the power system a success?
Let's take a look at the ingredients of our great Danish Windcase dish. Naturally, the first ingredient is a great number of wind turbines. And the most effective way to get them erected is to subsidize the generation of electricity through wind turbines, making it financially attractive to construct new ones. Legislation and planning should also be in place. In Denmark, wind power is first in line to the grid. That is to say that when wind power is available, the power stations must turn down their boilers. In addition, the authorities must create a national plan which establishes where wind turbines can be erected. A plan that takes into consideration people, landscape, and optimal energy generation. A strong and well-developed electricity grid must transmit the energy from the wind turbines out to where the consumers are. In Denmark, most of the energy is generated on the west coast and must be transmitted to the large cities and industrial estates. Moreover, there should also be good electricity connections to foreign grids, partly because Denmark, geographically speaking, is a small country, and partly to enable the sale and purchase of wind power across national borders. A strong electricity market is required, and a power exchange where electricity can be bought and sold, so that electricity generation can balance with electricity consumption. A national transmission system operator should ensure that the actual generation of electricity and its actual consumption always balance. So when the wind blows and wind power is plentiful, the national operator should ensure that the power stations step on the brakes. And when the wind is calm, that they step on the accelerator. Alternatively, the grid can be balanced by importing from or exporting to neighboring countries. For example, by importing cheap and clean hydropower from Norway.
While our dish is simmering, Let's have a look at the highways of the power grid in Denmark and its connections to the neighbouring countries. At the moment, wind power only produces 16% of the total electricity consumption. Power stations and others produce the rest. When the wind in Denmark increases in force from the west, where a lot of its wind turbines have been erected, the generation of wind power increases. Then, gradually, as the wind spreads, more power is generated than is consumed. The power, therefore, needs to be distributed to consumers in a wider area, which is why power is exported to Norway, Sweden and Germany. Now that the wind has swept across the country, the weather is back to a more normal situation.
I've come into the control room at the Danish national grid. The people here behind me ensure that the Danish wind energy is fully integrated into both the national and international electricity grids. Things are rather busy at the moment, as they have received a prognosis of a weather system approaching Denmark from the west, as you can see here. This deep low-pressure system has developed into a storm warning, with hurricane-strength winds due to hit Denmark within the next 6 hours or so. During this time, thanks to the strong winds, the wind turbines will have to shut down for security reasons. And this means a fluctuation in the energy production and also presents difficulties for the distribution of energy, electricity, across both the national and international grids. Right now, the people behind me are working out just how much surplus electricity this storm will produce in order to calculate when and how much electricity can be exported.
Denmark will be 100% self-sufficient in wind power during the storm, but power stations are kept in operation for when the storm abates and wind turbines stop. They must be ready to take over. This is managed here in the control centre. One thing is certain. The CO2 emission in Denmark within the next 24 hours will be at an absolute minimum thanks to wind power. In Norway and Sweden, the storm means they must be ready to receive cheap wind power. Their sluice gates must be closed at a specific hour. In return, Norway and Sweden can be pleased that their water reservoirs saved energy for power generation during the storm. Denmark, on the other hand, can look forward to importing CO2-free hydropower from the two countries once the wind abates. In this way, the two kinds of power generation supplement each other perfectly.
The storm is now hitting Denmark. As you can see, the storm is most powerful in the north. In the control room, they're holding their breath, as prognoses indicate wind speeds well in excess of 25 meters per second. So it's just a question of time before the first wind turbines need to be shut down due to too much wind, and a corresponding amount of electricity must be acquired from the power stations the moment that happens.
After a 4-hour storm, the wind has now abated to such an extent that it's possible to take stock of the situation.
Here we have an animation of what happened to wind power generation in western Denmark during the storm. Now, in the hours before the storm, you can see that the wind production was running at a maximum, indicated by the color yellow, and the surplus energy was immediately exported. Now we're nearing the moment when the storm hits the coast, the winds increase dramatically, and one by one, the wind turbines are shut down. There. In these vital minutes and seconds, the people here at the National Grid Control Room are really put to the test. The whole electricity supply for Western Denmark alters in a moment. Wind energy production is close to zero. Electricity export stops abruptly, and Western Denmark goes from electricity provided by wind energy to other forms of power production. Now, when the storm has passed, the wind turbines in Western Denmark can start up again. At the same time that the storm crosses over to eastern Denmark, the situation here now repeats itself over there. Right now, the people in the control room can catch their breaths. Wind power has been exploited perfectly, producing CO2-free electricity, and the users haven't even noticed it.
After the storm, the Norwegian and Swedish sluice gates are reopened and the generators once again produce CO2-free hydropower. Now Denmark can take some of the hydropower from water stored during the storm, and power generation in Northern Europe is back to normal, at least for a while. However, despite the huge challenges of integrating wind power into the grid, Denmark has no intention of settling at 20% wind power.
20% wind power in Denmark is only a partial target. Here we see plans for the future expansion of wind power in Denmark. A share of up to 50% wind power of the total electricity consumption is the target by the year 2020. And how will this happen? Well, that we can see here. In the future, the erection of wind turbines in Denmark will, to a far greater extent, be offshore. The green columns here represent the expansion capacity of the land-based wind turbines, which will level out. The blue columns represent the wind capacity of the offshore wind turbines, which by the year 2020 will account for approximately 1/3 of the total wind capacity in Denmark.
But how will Denmark manage a 50% wind power share, considering the difficulties of integrating merely a half of that today? Let's go to Copenhagen and get some answers.
Wind energy has delivered the most promising results in the EU for a number of years. And actually wind energy brings the perception to society that the change is possible.
One of the keys to Denmark's ambition to go from 20 to 50% wind power is located here. A charger for electric batteries. Thousands of electric cars, together with heat pumps for heating, will draw on a large proportion of the energy generated by the new wind turbines, thus reducing the CO2 emissions in the transport and heating sectors. Furthermore, electric cars do not only come in the size of this one here. Many of the big car manufacturers already have electric car models in more conventional sizes ready to be launched onto the market. Oh, one more thing. Electric cars in Copenhagen can park for free. In the near future, a smart grid system will make it possible to charge your car either quickly or cheaply. The latter, naturally, when most electricity is available, typically at night or when it is windy. Right now, there's a press conference on the world's largest test of intelligent electric cars, the Edison project, which kicks off the great electricity revolution in Denmark.
Here, the partners of the Edison project are signing the agreement involving both public and private partners. The Danish Minister for Climate and Energy, Connie Hedegaard, explains why the Danish government supports the project.
You know, as a country who has a lot of renewables, and particularly wind energy, of course it's interesting if we can find ways to use also the surplus power being generated when it blows a lot, when the wind is very strong. So if we could sort of store it on batteries and drive on these batteries, then of course it will be extremely interesting, not only for Denmark, but to the whole world.
Besides electrical cars and heat pumps, a variety of new tools are needed in order to reach a 50% wind power share of the electricity consumption. These tools could come into play as Denmark expands its wind power production with new and possible future offshore wind farms geographically spread around the country. At Horns Reef 2 in the North Sea, they're busy expanding Danish wind power for electric cars, heat pumps and other purposes. Before construction of the wind turbines really kicks off, the large 3-story transformer platform needs to be in place and a wide range of facilities must be established. Then, erection of the first of the in all 91 turbines may begin. The transformer platform collects power from all offshore wind turbines and transmits it via a submarine cable to the shore and into the grid. Horns Reef 2 is expected to generate what resembles the annual electricity consumption of 200,000 households. Here, the large submarine cable is carried ashore. Soon, the offshore wind farm will be connected to both Danish and international power grids. Besides new offshore wind farms at Horns Reef and Rødsand, Denmark will, in the years to come, erect 2 further offshore wind farms at Anholt. Several more farms can also be mounted at Horns Reef, Læsø, Jammerbugten, Ringkøbing, Storm Middelgrund and Rønnebar. In addition, Denmark's looking at a large offshore wind farm near Kriegers Flak in the Baltic Sea. Both Denmark, Sweden and Germany plan offshore wind farms in the area, and instead of each country separately carrying wind power ashore, the farms are connected. So it's possible not only to carry the power ashore, but also to exchange the power among the 3 countries. It could become the world's first offshore mini-supergrid, paving the way for future supergrids in the North Sea and the Mediterranean. In this way, the project has a high international focus and is supported by the EU.
Well, my electric car has been recharged here in Copenhagen. It's time to move on. For many, the Danish Windcase will seem like a distant dream of the future. But climate changes mean that we must find sustainable solutions for the energy we use. Wind power is one of many possibilities, but more than any other renewable energy, the prospect of wind power reducing the world's CO2 emissions by 10 billion tons by the year 2020 is not a distant dream. As we've seen from the example from Denmark, there are sustainable solutions for integrating wind power into an electricity grid. So, when we talk about energy, the future is green. And in Denmark, the future has already begun.
We know roughly the scale of the action we need to make as a world, and we also know roughly where we have to act. It's about energy efficiency, it's about low carbon energy, it's about stopping deforestation. What we need now is political will.